Solar panel technology was first created in 1954 by Bell Labs in New Jersey. The company name might sound familiar. It was founded by the inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, and today is owned by telecommunications giant Nokia. Back in 1954, employees at Bell first showed off this new energy source by powering a small toy Ferris wheel and radio transmitter. Since then, solar power efficiency has drastically improved and is now a common sight on the rooftops of many homes and buildings across the U.S. By 2030, the Solar Energy Industries Association projects that 1 in 7 homes will be powered by this source.
The benefits of solar energy is that it will go on for a long time. It's what we would call a sort of renewable energy source. It's clean. It's never going to run out. We don't need to mine coal or sort of go and frack gas or, go exploring for sort of fuel sources.
That's Associate Professor Ned Eakins-Dox at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. Despite solar's many positives, one long-standing downside is that it only works during the day when the sun is out. But that may be about to change. Eakins-Dox, along with a team of researchers in Australia, wants to develop a new type of solar panel, one that collects energy at night. The project is still in its early stages, but is an exciting development nonetheless. To grasp this new idea, it's first important to talk about how solar energy works.
We receive energy from the sun, and we can use that either to heat things up, to make steam perhaps and drive the steam turbine, or in the case of photovoltaic solar cells, which you're probably familiar with from the panels that you put on roofs, we can convert that sunlight directly into electricity. And that's now a mature technology. It's very cheap. But what we've been working on here in Sydney is to think about what happens to the energy after that. Because what happens is we receive this energy from the sun, and we can absorb it on the Earth's surface, and that's what keeps the Earth warm. But then that energy has to go somewhere.
If it stayed, the Earth's temperature would endlessly increase. Instead, it dissipates by going back out into space in the form of infrared energy.
These wavelengths of light that we can't see, but this is actually a really strong effect. So the Earth continuously radiates out into space with its characteristic temperature that's close to room temperature. And so you might be familiar with the idea of a thermal camera. These are the sorts of cameras that, say, the military use to see if there are people crawling around in bushes or things like that. So we all give off heat. The Earth gives off heat into the universe. I'm radiating heat into the room I'm speaking from. And so what we've been able to do is use the fact that whenever there is a temperature difference between something that is emitting light and something that's absorbing light, we're able to generate electricity.
Eakins-Dox's team is homing in on this process in order to make solar energy more efficient.
My research group specializes in high-efficiency photovoltaics or high-efficiency solar power. And to give your listeners some context to this, if we look at the type of photovoltaic solar panel you might put on your roof, you'll find that it's about 20% efficient. And what that means is that you'll get 20% of the energy that the sun provides coming out of that solar panel as electricity. So coming back to this idea of this nighttime solar, it was actually by thinking about the mathematics of the problem that we realized that it's not just absorbing sunlight that can generate power. It can also be the emission of thermal light. So something that we are all doing all the time. It was sort of through that process that we realized this was possible.
While the prospect of generating solar power at night is an incredible leap forward, the raw capacity of this new solar technology is still in its early stages. Another challenge? The high price tag.
I think the first applications we're going to see here are going to be in not generating solar power from people's roofs, because the technology has to be really cheap to do that. But for example, what we've already demonstrated in our lab could power a wristwatch, for example. So then you could see that industry could start taking their sort of baby steps, manufacturing small-scale devices. They don't have to be super cheap. They just have to be cheap enough that people see some benefit in this. And then, of course, as the manufacturing increases, costs come down.
These field tests on smaller devices show that while Eakins-Dox and his team have managed to prove the technology works, they still have a long way to go before it hits the market. So, how will this technology go from a lab setting to the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, quite literally, and probably the billion-dollar question. How can we make this technology manufacturable? I'll be absolutely honest. What we're using at the moment is a semiconductor material that was developed for night vision equipment. So it's made of mercury, cadmium, and tellurium. It's called mercury cadmium telluride. It's one of the most effective infrared semiconductors that we have. But if we think for a moment, mercury, cadmium, and tellurium are all toxic elements, and tellurium happens to be also quite rare. Luckily, we don't have much other uses for tellurium, so the very small amount of tellurium we use for night vision equipment is plenty sufficient for that. But you can already see that there's an immediate roadblock.
Eakins-Dox says that moving away from such harmful materials is a key future target for his lab.
You can make these compound semiconductors made of group 3 and group 5 elements. They're called 3-5 semiconductors. And that's going to allow us to make a much more scalable and more environmentally friendly technology. So we don't have to use mercury cadmium telluride. It's just that was the first thing that we were able to get to work in the lab.
According to the Finnish scientists who pioneered these 3-5 semiconductors, it could allow a single solar cell to reach a power conversion efficiency of close to 50%. While the semiconductor materials are a critical step forward for solar, it's by no means the only roadblock remaining. Despite the uphill battle, Eakins-Dox contends that the upside potential is massive, and so his team and other researchers remain hard at work trying to bring us into a more efficient solar-powered future.
The role I see here with the university is really just we've incubated this technology. It's just been born and still got a little bit of growing, I think, in the cradle in our hands. But I think once it gets into industry's hands, that's when we really see the pace picking up, because industry really have the equipment to scale the technology in the way that it will need to be scaled to reach consumers.
In a landscape where millions are conscious of protecting the environment but have reservations about drastic change, this could be the spark that makes that transition a no-brainer. To find out more about this topic and our guest, Professor Ned Eakins-Dox, visit viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri and Alex Winton. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
I think for so many years, if you were a reader, you were kind of nerdy. But now it's like, no, reading is cool. Reading is fun to do.
How TikTok has changed people's perception on reading. Then,
the conformity bias says we basically, as human beings, take our cues as to what to eat, how to dress, really how to live our lives from those around us.
Looking inwards at what we're influenced by. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.